on. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to this water right hearing on the water right change petition for the California WaterFix project. I am Tam Doduk, board member and hearing officer, co-hearing officer for these proceedings. To my right is board chair Felicia Marcus and co-hearing officer as well. We will be joining shortly by board member Didi Diadamo, who will be to the chair's right. On my left are our staff members, attorney Dana Heinrich, supervising water resources control engineer Connie Mittenhofer, and Kyle Oceandesco. We're also being assisted by other staff today as needed. A couple of general announcements. First of all, please take a look around and identify the exit closest to you. In the event of an emergency, an alarm will sound and we will evacuate this room immediately. Please take your valuables with you. Please take the stairs and not the elevators down to the first floor and exit to the park across the street, where we will wait for the all clear signal before returning. If you are not able to take the stairs, please flag down one of us or anyone wearing orange colored clothing, and you will be directed to a protective area. Second announcement, this hearing is being webcasted and recorded. Both the audio and video will be made available. So as you are providing your comments, please speak into the microphone and begin by stating your name and affiliation. We have our court reporter back with us today, and the court reporter will prepare a transcript of this hearing. The transcript for part 1 of the hearing has already been posted on the State Water Board's WaterFix petition hearing website, and the transcript for part 2 will be posted as soon as possible after the completion of part 2. If you would like a copy of the transcript sooner, please make arrangements with the court reporter directly. Finally, and most importantly, because I have already heard several dings, please take a moment right now to put all noise-making devices on silent, vibrate, do not disturb. Mr. Herrick, I am looking at you. Even if you think they are already set that way, please take a moment and check. All right, and let the record note that we now have been joined by board member Didi Diadamo. All right, I have a lengthy script on the background of the water right hearings as well as the proceedings for today. We welcome those of you who are participating in this proceeding for the first time, and especially those who are appearing today to present your policy statements. We look forward to hearing them and to hearing from you. But before we get to that, as most of you know, we had an announcement from the Department of Water Resources yesterday, and I see the department's director here. So I'd like to ask her to come up. In light of the developments yesterday, we welcome you, Director Nemeth, and ask you to provide us in person an update on the situation with respect to the WaterFix project. We appreciated receiving by email yesterday afternoon your press release, but it really did not shed a lot of light in terms of these proceedings. So appreciate you being here and ask you to please provide us a formal update on the status of not only your thinking on the project, but also your thinking with respect to the petition that is before us.
Sure. Is this, okay, this is on. Good morning, Chair Dudok, Ms. Marcus and Ms. Diadamo. It's a pleasure to be here. It probably won't surprise you that I am planning to describe that in my policy statement. So if, with your permission, if you would allow me to just read from my policy statement, I think that may help enlighten us all on where we are in this process.
I would ask Director Nemeth that, yes, please do read it, but also please also provide it for the record.
I will do so. Okay, so first I want to open by thanking you for the opportunity this morning to help frame this important task that's in front of the State Water Board. For those of us in state government that work on Delta issues, The physical, regulatory, and human complexities in generating solutions are always daunting. I want to thank the board for the manner in which it's carried out these proceedings to date. You have before you a water right change petition to allow operation of up to 3 intakes for the State Water Project along the Sacramento River. As stated by Secretary Laird at the outset of Part 1 of this hearing, the Brown administration pursues California WaterFix because the situation in the Delta remains harmful for fish and puts millions of people and millions of acres of farmland at risk of water supply disruptions. While we have debated and litigated, our ecosystem and water supply reliability problems have only worsened throughout the last 3 decades. The California WaterFix is an important part of the solution to these challenges. We have achieved a great deal since this hearing was initiated in early 2016. A final environmental impact report and environmental impact statement was prepared by the Department of Water Resources and Bureau of Reclamation. In 2017, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife issued an incidental take permit. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service both issued non-jeopardy biological opinions. And in July of 2017, DWR approved the project. Finally, and importantly, last fall, public water agencies throughout California that contract for state water project deliveries voted to support WaterFix. Yesterday, I sent a memo to them outlining decisions and actions that would provide an additional option for a staged approach to implementation of WaterFix. This memo reflects our decision. The press is incorrect that we have decided on one tunnel. We have been and continue to be engaged in high-level decisions with water agencies about who will participate and how. Unfortunately, we cannot keep you fully informed as these conversations move forward, but it is critically important that the department begin to outline potential options for staged implementation so that these water agencies can have that information to bring in front of their boards for public discussion about implementation of WaterFix. That was the sole purpose of yesterday's memo. To be clear, we are not modifying the project or the change requested in our petition. In fact, it is crucial that the board complete these proceedings and issue that decision on the project as currently proposed. As with any water project of this size, many participants and potential participants need guidance from this board about the project that they can build and operate before making final commitments. In addition to pursuing the project as proposed, DWR will also focus on an option that would allow implementation in the near term of a first stage that would include those elements of WaterFix fundable by South of Delta State Water Project contractors. Under this scenario, we would pursue the remaining elements when additional funding materializes. Preparing for that eventuality now will provide the flexibility to immediately implement a first stage and not delay the significant benefits of that effort if full funding is not available for the entire project. Again, we continue to believe that the full project as defined is the correct and necessary path for California. But implementing construction in stages would also be prudent, fiscally responsible, and meet the needs of the funders identified to date. And let me repeat that DWR continues to seek the addition of all 3 intake locations for WaterFix. DWR believes that the ultimate construction of the whole project is better for California. Moreover, since our various permits address the full project, the state will have the flexibility to meet everyone's needs when the time and funding comes for any deferred second stage. In considering California WaterFix, I hope you will again reflect on DWR's commitment to meet our obligations under our water right permits to protect beneficial uses of water. To do this, the state needs additional points of diversion on the Sacramento River that are operated in real time and use information developed through an adaptive management process in order to improve ecosystem health and improve water supply reliability for the future. In short, the California WaterFix must be implemented to best serve Californians by protecting both the Delta estuary and improving water supply reliability. Adaptive management is a fundamental cornerstone described in the Department of Fish and Wildlife incidental take permit and federal biological opinions issued for California WaterFix. DWR will put in place the monitoring, research, investments, and communication we need to implement WaterFix, and DWR is committed to management that is transparent and built on collaborative science. Modeling is an effective tool for assessing the differences between two conditions, and DWR has used the industry standard models to analyze the differences between a future with and without California WaterFix. A critical component of the state water project operations is real-time decision-making. California WaterFix proposes that real-time operations will be an important component of managing the state water project in order to meet our regulatory obligations. Only through real-time operations can the state water project account for actual conditions that inform operational decisions, including fish presence, weather patterns, and unreported changes in diversion. DWR operators have an excellent record of accounting for and adapting to these unpredictable factors. We pursue this project in large part because our work with our state and federal fishery agencies convinces us that a new configuration for the Delta conveyance, along with state-of-the-art fish screens and adaptive management, provides the flexibility to move water in a more benign way and will be protective of listed species. In closing, I hope you will bear in mind the fundamental respect that my department holds and has demonstrated for your authority and your critical role in regulating the state's water resources. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Director. Let me try to convey what I believe I heard you said and ask for you to either affirm or clarify.
Sure.
It is my understanding from your statement that the department is not seeking at this time to change the petition that is before us.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I noted that the director took 6 minutes for her policy statement. That minute will be subtracted. Actually, were you planning, Mr. Mizell, on providing a policy statement? I'm sorry, an opening statement when your case in chief, because normally what we've asked parties to do is keep track of their policy statement and deduct that time from your opening statement time.
Absolutely, and our intention was that you could remove this from the 60 minutes allocated for the revised panel 1 structure.
Thank you very much. I see Mr. Obeji in the audience. Yesterday afternoon, after receiving the press release from the department regarding this matter, we also received a renewed motion from NRDC, the Bay Institute, and I believe Defenders of Wildlife. Mr. Obeji, if you would mind coming up and providing your comments on this matter.
Thank you very much. To the hearing officers, board staff, members of the public, my name is Doug Obeji. I'm here on behalf of the Natural Resources Defense Council et al. We filed a motion for a stay or continuance of the hearing in light of the anticipated changes on January 31st. The board denied that motion on the 6th in light of the fact that there were only press reports that DWR was considering changing the project. DWR has now announced and unveiled massive new modeling that has not been presented to the board and has announced a change in the project so that they would stage implementation and construction. They lack the funding to complete the project as currently designed, the entire project, and so they are looking at building a first phase. As the hearing officers have explained, this hearing is to set the initial appropriate flow criteria under the Delta Reform Act for the project as it would be initially operated, subject to modification over time. That necessarily implicates a single tunnel to intake project as currently contemplated by DWR. We filed this motion for stay because all of the protestants are prejudiced by the fact that there is this massive change in the project and new modeling information that none of us were aware of and none of us have had time to analyze or see. All of the testimony in this proceeding is for a 3-intake, 2-tunnel project under certain operations as described in a final notice of determination under CEQA and final permits. DWR in their press release has stated that they are going to do a supplemental CEQA analysis. They are going to need to amend their federal biological opinions and amend their California Endangered Species Act permit. The prerequisites to starting part 2 of this hearing were completion of the CEQA process and completion of these Endangered Species Act permits and biological opinions so that protestants would have an adequate project description under which to be able to question witnesses and understand the impacts of the project. That has not happened. We are extremely prejudiced by this last-minute filing that fundamentally changes the scope of this project. Moreover, as we discussed in our motion, under the board's regulations, they cannot approve a water right for a project that would be constructed in phases. You need to file separate applications. It's unclear to us why a change petition, you would be allowed to do something through a change in a water right that would be illegal under a water right application per se. Moreover, the board's regulations regarding construction of works requires diligent construction. As DWR's motion states, they don't know when they would or if they would begin construction of a second phase because it would be dependent upon funding. And finally, the Delta Reform Act of 2009 requires that the parties that would benefit from a project enter into arrangements or enter into contracts to pay for all of the costs associated with this project before they can begin construction. It appears that DWR is asking the board to say that this is a single project, 3 intakes, 2 tunnels, and then for purposes of the Delta Reform Act to say, this is a 2 intake, 1 tunnel project, we're gonna start construction without paying or making arrangements for the full cost. Fundamentally, we don't, without seeing the modeling, without having time to understand it, without having the testimony of DWR about this changed modeling, we can't proceed in this hearing. It's fundamentally unfair, it's against the public interest, and what it's going to do is create a sequential need for DWR to have a second round, which means all of us public interest folks will be spending time and money and resources that we don't have to participate in that hearing. And for those reasons, we renew our motion for an emergency stay or continuance and ask that that stay be granted until such time, as explained in your February 6th order, that there can be briefing on whether this constitutes sufficient change in the project that warrants a new filing, a new application, and/or additional testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Obeji. Any question for Mr. Obeji? Everyone, sit down. We received also, yesterday as well as early today, several joinders in NRDC's motion. I will call up those parties who have submitted joinders and give them the opportunity to provide some short comments, not to repeat what has already been said, but to add anything that you would like for us to consider. We will begin with Restore the Delta.
Good morning, Chair Dudek and board members. We wish we were seeing you under different circumstances. We did file—
Identify yourself for the court
Barbara
recorder.
Berrigan Perea with Restore the Delta. We did file a joinder to NRDC's motion. On September 26th, General Manager for Metropolitan Water District, Jeff Keitlinger, had announced to his board of directors that they had already looked at and considered a single tunnel for 2/3 of the price that would deliver 2/3 of the water, and that it could provide good results. In San Bernardino, in mid-January, at the San Bernardino Valley Water District, there were discussions about a new 6,000 CFS tunnel. And on February 5th, at the Orange County Municipal Water District, it was stated that a 6,000 CFS tunnel was a consideration, that it would be several feet larger in diameter, and that really the operational criteria wouldn't be completely put together for review until April or May. So we have new materials right now added to the hearings by the Department of Water Resources that we have not been able to review. There is going to be the need for a supplemental EIR, which indicates there are significant changes being made to the project. While you have to evaluate the petitioner's case, the petitioner's case grossly contradicts what is being messaged and told to the public in government hearings through water agencies throughout Southern California. Consequently, there is no true transparency in what constitutes WaterFix. We're being jammed by the Department of Water Resources, and we are setting up a condition with phase construction where a water right could end up in cold storage. We feel that the process and the push by DWR to move forward is disrespecting the people of California, the public trust, the ideas of transparency and good government. Thank you.
Thank you. City of Antioch. Mr. Emmerich, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Chair. Matthew Emmerich, City of Antioch. For right now, I don't have anything else to add. I would join into the last two comments, which I thought were very well articulated. Thank you.
Very efficient. Thank you, Mr. Emmerich. He got it. Ms. Desjardins, are you here? CSPA. Oh, Ms. Meserve.
Good morning, Chair Dudek. Ms. Jardin is on her way. She'll be here this afternoon. She does have cross if we were to proceed, but I just want to let you know that. And we also did a joinder just now, so I would like to make comments in line after the others.
CSPA, are you here? Let it be noted, CSPA also filed a joinder. North Delta Cares.
Good morning. My name is Barbara Daly. I'm representing North Delta Cares, and what's been said expresses our opinions and what we have to say. So we have nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Daly. Mr. Porgans also submitted a joinder. I do not see Mr. Porgans in the audience. I do not have a list of the newer joiners, so I will ask Ms. Meserve to come up. Oh, hang on. I'm being handed something. San Joaquin County.
Thank you, Madam. On behalf of the San Joaquin County protestants, we joined in NRDC's...
Identify yourself, please.
Tom Keeling, on behalf of the county.
Mr. Keeling.
We joined in NRDC's motion, which is now ripe. This is not premature. We're not talking about a hypothetical anymore, as stated in last week's ruling, or the ruling earlier this week. I have very little to add to what has been said, other than that characterizing this as a mere staged approach is tantamount to saying, move along, folks, nothing to see here. If that were true, we wouldn't be talking about a new supplemental EIR coming out in June to be supposedly certified or finalized in October. We wouldn't be talking about new engineering specs on the tunnels, and we certainly wouldn't be talking about endless pages of new modeling that no one in this room on the protestant side has yet had an opportunity to review. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keeling. Downey Brand has also submitted a joinder.
Good morning, Chair Dudek, members of the board, David Olajim, Downey Brand, on behalf of the Sacramento Valley Group, North Delta Water Agency, Tehama-Kaluza Canal Water Authority. Chair Dudek, in response to the motion, which we joined by NRDC, just a couple of points. First of all, as indicated in our joinder, the board has been very clear from the outset of these hearings that the efficient commencement of Part 2 should wait upon the completion of the environmental document. The board delayed Part 2 for a number of months after the approval of the project last summer to allow for the orderly presentation of evidence in Part 2. We now learn that there will be a supplemental environmental document released, I believe, in June, with the goal of a complete environmental document, final document, and approval in October. Under the way the board has very well set up this hearing, we should wait at least until the environmental document comes out in June so that we have all of that information so the board can make an informed decision. Second of all, Director Namath just said this is the same project as before. Approximately now, I believe, 45 minutes ago, the department served on all parties a email which indicated, as best I could tell, there are literally 80 to 100 different model runs. They are the hydrologic model runs, biological model runs, and the email that was sent out to the board service list indicates that information would be relevant to the questions in front of us. None of the protestants have had more than a chance to look at that email. It is, as Mr. Obiji said, a basic violation of due process to conduct this hearing without us having full and free opportunity to have our experts look at that material and to then be able to cross-examine. Because in that information, we may well have things that we want to ask the department's witnesses in part 2 on the cross-examination and testimony they've already presented. We don't have that opportunity. And therefore, delay of this hearing for a reasonable amount of time, 45 days, 60 days, is necessary in order to assure due process. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lajam. Ms. Meserve? And then what I'll do is I'll go through the remaining parties and ask if any of the other parties wish to add any comments.
Good morning. OSHA Meserve for local agencies of the North Delta, Bogle, Stillwater Orchards, and Diablo Vineyards. In addition, I represent a number of Part 2 parties, Environmental Council of Sacramento, Sandhill Cranes, and Friends of Stone Lakes, that are also concerned about this proceeding with the hearing in light of yesterday's announcement. In preparation for today, the parties have been reviewing all of the cases in chief submitted for Part 2. A large portion of time has been examining and creating questions around the relationship of the new scenario CWF H3+ to what was presented before, so that we can do that. And we've been trying to make the adjustment as the board ordered to proceed with the hearing. We were told too that we should be comparing the no action alternative to the current proposal, but we have to look back at our analysis from what we saw before, which was what was available to us leading up to the submission of our Part 2 testimony on November 30th. We had to rely on that prior information. That was bad enough. Now yesterday, we hear yet there's another change to the project, which although it was apparently in the works with DWR and the contractors for several months, was never brought forth to this board, and it's prejudice to both the board and the public and all the parties to this proceeding. There's a couple of key points that come from the letter that Ms. Nemeth, Director Nemeth released yesterday. It's significant enough changes to prepare a supplemental environmental impact report. After practicing CEQA for 20 years, I can tell you nobody prepares a supplemental EIR unless they need to. If they could rely on the prior EIR or just prepare an addendum, they would have done it. These changes also require changes to their permitting that they've already received. And there's no word on how we're going to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act and how the Bureau is going to proceed or participate in this phased approach. Indeed, the Bureau has said nothing. They are also a petitioner. We don't know the details of the new project. We received a conceptual diagram that shows that it's a different size tunnel, 2 different size tunnels than were in alternative 4A, which we've been studying for years. That means and the phasing would mean a new construction period, different operations, different impacts on fish and wildlife, and different impacts on legal users of water. None of that has been disclosed. So it's a lot more than the 90 modeling files that were released yesterday and that have been in the works, I believe, for months.
Wrap up, Ms. Meserve.
If the changes are as minimal as DWR argues, then there would be no reason to be completing a 7-month CEQA review. We shouldn't be required to proceed with this hearing until there's a clear project description and some clear analysis so that we can understand how this affects both Part 1 and Part 2 issues. We should be provided the opportunity to go back and revise both our Part 1 and Part 2 testimony to match the currently proposed project, whatever it is. And then we will need to proceed after that. I can understand today accepting policy statements. That's more general, and it's about the overall project, which, as Director Nemeth has explained, still they're attempting to proceed with. But any other proceeding, this cannot be taken care of in cross-examination. This is too big of a change, and we need to know the details before we proceed further.
Thank you, Ms. Meserve. All right, that's at least all the joinders I have for now. Let me go through by party number. We'll begin with the state water contractors.
Good morning. Stephanie Morris for the State Water Contractors. The State Water Contractors support the department. I would like to note for the record that the department has said it is not changing its petition. It still seeks the full project. It is simply looking at a possible stage implementation of construction. This is common in large infrastructure projects. It's also common in water rights proceedings that they move forward before financing decisions are made and also before construction begins because it's necessary. It's a planning and it's a permit. In fact, the Delta Reform Act requires before construction can begin on this project that a change petition be granted by this board. So while we understand frustration and we understand the department has provided additional modeling for a staged implementation, we still think it's relevant and efficient to proceed with part 2 of this hearing based on the full 9,000 CFS project and for the board to consider options for looking at a future date, giving parties time to look at a staged implementation, additional submittal of evidence and cross-examination and response to that evidence. The reason that it is not inefficient to continue right now is because the department is saying it still seeks the full 9,000 project, and therefore that full 9,000 needs to be analyzed, and the evidence that has been submitted by DWR and the other protestants needs to move before the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. San Luis and Delta Mendota, followed by Westlands.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Harms here for San Luis and Delta Mendota. We don't have any comment at this time.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Does Westland have any comment? Thank you. The Sac Valley Group has already spoken. Does anyone else wish to speak on that half of that group?
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, Ms. Dodek, Ms. Marcus, Ms. Diadamo. Ryan Becerra for the cities of Folsom, Roseville, San Juan Water District, and Sacramento Suburban Water District. What the department has announced is a phased project. Director Namath just said that. She referred to the second phase as a deferred phase. There clearly, even if the department goes forward exactly as planned, there will clearly be some period of time where one part of the project operates and the other does not. You have heard my clients in part 1 express serious concern about the possibility that this project, whatever it may be, will dramatically affect dry year storage in Folsom Reservoir in any given year. This board issued an emergency order during the drought to protect 1 year of Folsom Reservoir storage due to the potential impacts on public health and safety supplies out of that reservoir. There therefore, as the department has proposed the project, be a substantial risk that any year during the first phase of operation could dramatically affect Folsom Reservoir. There is absolutely no evidence in this record about that risk. And the fact that the department released something like 85 new technical studies yesterday about how a phased project would work demonstrates that the department wants to know what would happen during the first phase as well. Right now, we don't know what that would be. We proceeded on part 1 with the concept that in any given year during project implementation, the entire project would be operating. That is not what we are looking at now. The department can say that they are proposing the full project, but what they are proposing is the operation of a partial project for some undefined period of time based and reflected in technical studies that we got yesterday at 5 p.m. I thought that our friends at Westland's policy statement yesterday hit the nail exactly on the head. The proposed phased project is a state project. The petition you have in front of you is a federal and state project. We have absolutely no idea whatsoever what the first phase, a state-only phase, would do to federal facilities and the contractors who depend on those federal facilities to get their water supplies. At this point, there is no evidence in this record, and the department, as far as I know, has not proposed to submit any evidence into this record as to how legal users of water could be injured during the implementation of the first phase. Moreover, we're here to talk about, on part 2 potentially, impacts on public trust resources. We're talking several listed species in these rivers. Any given year of impact on those species could be unreasonable. We have no idea, and there's no evidence in the record, what effect may occur on those species during the first phase of implementation. So the board needs to stop and think very carefully how to proceed forward, because I understand you want to proceed with this. We've been going a long time, but we literally have no record whatsoever and no procedures for how to deal with what may occur during the first phase of implementation as proposed by the department.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra. Anyone else from Group 7?
Good morning, Aaron Ferguson for Sacramento County Water Agency, Glen Cluse Irrigation District, Biggs West Gridley Water District, Carmichael Water District, as well as Placer County Water Agency and the County of Sacramento, who will be participating in part 2 if we proceed. We certainly support Mr. Abiji's request, and for the most part, support all the comments that Mr. Becerra just made in terms of the upstream operations. The agency certainly has concerns about how the changed or staged project may affect operations. And he's right, the project they're proposing.
There's no need to repeat what he said.
On the ground for a period of time, and it's important to understand how it's going to affect folks upstream. From the county's perspective, the physical changes in the landscape are critical and important, and we need to be able to analyze what the physical changes when we're going with a two intake, 1 tunnel project, what that configuration means in terms of the change in the landscape in and around those physical facilities. And so we certainly need time to understand that. I have a sense the EIR is probably going to be addressing stuff like that. We need a chance to seriously understand that and be able to cross-examine the proponent's witnesses on those issues. I will just say that, I don't know the extent to which DWR might suggest that this is not surprise testimony. They're not submitting any testimony, so there's no big deal. I will just say that it's certainly important information, and it's critical information that we need a chance to be able to evaluate in order to be able to cross-examine their witnesses in an efficient fashion. For all those reasons, we support the request to stay the hearing.
Thank you. Moving on, I have City of Brentwood. Reclamation Group 10. Okay, I will go refer you by group number now. Hopefully you still remember your group number. It's a test, Mr. O'Laughlin. 11, the Water Farm. 12, County of Colusa. 13, Sacramento Regional Sand District. Ms. Tabor.
Good morning, Kelly Tabor on behalf of Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District, and for efficiency, also on behalf of City of Stockton, which comes up later. Regional SAN and Stockton join in the NRDC motion and endorse the comments made by the other speakers. We have just 2 additional brief comments to make, and that is to point out that as regards the phased approach, the EIR that was completed and certified by DWR and offered into the record at this point specifically rejected analyzing a phased alternative, which had been recommended by the Delta Stewardship Council, on the grounds that that alternative would be both fiscally imprudent and result in more significant environmental impacts to the Delta and the county's residents. And I don't have handy the citation, but it's in documents that we've submitted to the board in the last few weeks. Those specific findings are troubling and suggest that those go straight to the questions that are at issue here in Part 2, and I think further support NRDC's motion and the request to the parties that it would be essential to see a full environmental analysis of the impacts of a staged approach in light of the findings that have already been made by the department. And secondly, I would ask that the hearing officers request clarification from Director Nemeth on a statement that I believe the parties heard her make, that it would be, the department cannot keep the board and the public fully informed of the progress they're making in evaluating and potentially implementing a phased construction of the project. I don't think I misheard that. I don't understand why, as a public agency, especially with this proceeding ongoing, the department would be unable to keep the public and the participants fully informed, and certainly this board. So we would like that clarified today on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tabor. Next, I have Yolo County with East Bay Mud to follow.
Good morning. Phil Pogledich, County Counsel for Yolo County. I have a policy statement I'll be delivering separately on behalf of Supervisor Oscar Villegas, but just to address the NRDC motion, Yolo County supports the motion. As you may know, Yolo County's participation in Part 2 is going to focus on construction-related impacts within the county, particularly in the Clarksburg area, and particularly for the agricultural industry in that area. To the extent the phasing of construction is going to result in construction over a longer period of time or other changes, then our Part 2 testimony would necessarily change to reflect the potential for either longer or greater or perhaps both effects on the overall impacts that our agricultural industry would experience in the Clarksburg area. So as others have said, I think it's critical for us to understand what a staged or phased construction of this project would mean in terms of impacts on our local agricultural industry in order for us to properly participate in Part 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much. East Bay Mud. Not seeing anyone. We'll move on to group number 16. Triant. 17, San Joaquin River Exchange Contractors. 18, San Joaquin Tributary Authority. Remember, Mr. O'Laughlin, you are group 18.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you. I can't remember yesterday. Thank you, Tim O'Laughlin, representing the San Joaquin Tributaries Authority. I've been harping on this issue since this hearing started, and I'm going to bring it back around again. Your charge in this hearing under the Delta Reform Act is setting an appropriate delta flow criteria. It's probably one of the key components of this hearing as we move forward. And I'm just, on a practical basis, confused about how we would do that now, given that we don't know how the project's going to go forward. So I have no problem if DWR wants to get up here and affirm that they're going forward with the entire petition as filed, because then we can have an appropriate delta flow criteria for the entire project. And if they decide that they want to take the risk of phasing it and segmenting it in sections and parts, that's fine with me. But from the get-go, they're going to know what the appropriate delta flow criteria will be, what inflows will be, what outflows will be, and what the bypass flows will be. And I find that very difficult to believe that that's going to happen in this process. So if DWR can't have it both ways. They can't say that they want to segment the project and not have this board decide what the appropriate delta flow criteria are going to be from the outset. And they're going to have to live by that, because that is required by the legislature to be part of your approval for their petition. So if the petition goes forward as a whole, they're going to have to buy it.
Thank you, Mr. O'Laughlin. Group 20, actually, I believe Ms. Meserve covered 19 and 20. 21, Central Delta and South Delta.
Thank you, John Herrick for South Delta Parties. We join in NRDC's motion and just reaffirm the other comments of the protestants as why the proceeding should not proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Herrick. Efficient as always. Stockton East is next. North San Joaquin Water Conservation District. Okay. Solano County. Contra Costa County and Contra Costa County Water Authority, Water Agency, excuse me. All right. 28, California Delta Chambers. No. 29, Steamboat Resort. 30, Save the California Delta Alliance. 33, Planning and Conservation League. Yes, it does. Sorry, it does.
Yes. Good morning, Bob Wright. I'm here representing Friends of the River and Sierra Club California. And we also join in and support NRDC's motion. And I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the comments that OSHA Reserve made a few minutes ago, that under the law, CEQA, Public Resources Code Section 21166, a supplemental EIR is only required if one of three things happens. Substantial changes occur in the project which require major revisions in the EIR. That's the language that the statute uses. Or substantial changes in the circumstances surrounding the project require major revisions of the EIR. Or there's significant new information becomes available. So we've got a free country, we've got a First Amendment. The DWR director and the state water contractors are free to tell you, to speak, that there are no changes in the project. But under the law, there must be substantial changes in the project or the circumstances or significant information, or no supplemental EIR is required. And as OSHA Reserve told you, in her 20 years, and I'd add in my 45 years, nobody, to my knowledge, has ever prepared a supplemental EIR if they didn't have to because they met the requirements in Section 21166 of CEQA. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next will be Group 34, the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water. Not seeing anyone here. We will now go to 38, Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association and Institute for Fishery Resources. Ms. Meserve, you don't represent them.
I am an authorized representative for Environmental Justice Coalition for Water. Mr. Bailey couldn't be here today. I think their clients would be concerned about the very same issues.
Would be? Do you know for a fact?
Yes. Well, he authorized me to come today and help argue for a stay of the hearing.
All right.
And I know that he has submitted testimony regarding impacts to fisheries in particular and subsistence fishing. And if there's a different operational scenario that has two intakes operating, then the kind of switching off and on that we saw proposed with the 3 intakes, we don't know yet, and maybe the 90 files of modeling reveal this, or maybe the supplemental EIR would reveal it, but it could be very different fish impacts, and it may be much harder if they're hammering those 2 intakes on more for fish to get past these, and that's just yet another question about what this project is that has been announced yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meserve. 38, PCCFA. 39, oh, Ms. Daly has already spoken. 41, Ms. Seward, are you here?
Nikki Seward with Snug Harbor Resorts, LLC. Good morning. First of all, I join in NRDC's motion to stay, and I only got the email this morning, so it is, to me, a big change. I want to point out, I'm going to probably take the whole 5 minutes, but I wanted to point out DWR 574 is, which was uploaded around, I believe, the beginning of November, is a graphic showing one tunnel. It's a side view of what one tunnel looks like going through Bacon Island. So that made me, that was going to be one of the things. I've been reviewing their documents. I was going to ask about that. Why are they only showing one tunnel? So they uploaded that in November. So I'm just kind of curious, why did it take this long for all of us to get the information? Or was that a graphic mistake? I don't know. I just want to point that out. I would like to say that since 2000, the water quality, the drinking water quality for humans, everybody talks about the fish. I'm talking about the humans. The drinking water quality in the Delta is degrading. Our wells
Ms. Stewart, I
Sorry.
need you to focus.
Okay.
We are right now only focusing on the announcement from the department and NRDC's motion to stay.
Okay, so it is a policy statement.
No, I'm not seeking policy statement yet. I'm only asking the parties for their input on the motion before us from NRDC.
Sorry. I support the motion by NRDC to stay until, for at least 90 days, because there is a lot of modeling to review. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. We'll get to your policy statement, I promise, later today. 42, so Agra Corp. 43, Clifton Court. Hello, Ms. Womack.
Good morning. Suzanne Womack, representing my family farm, Clifton Court, LP. And I'm proud to be a part of such an intelligent group of Protestants, and I'm proud to join NRDC's motion for continuance. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Womack. And I have, is there anyone here from ECOS, Environmental Council of Sacramento? Friends, oh, is that O'Shea again? I'm sorry, Ms. Meserve. Okay. Friends of Stone Lake, Save our Sandhill Cranes. All right. I think that covers all the officially designated parties. Are there any parties whom I did not call? Mr. Keeling, didn't I see you earlier?
You did, and I was speaking at that time on behalf of the San Joaquin County Protestants. I've also been authorized to appear specially by Michael Jackson on behalf of CSPA, CWIN, and Aqua Alliance. As you indicated earlier, those Protestants have joined in the NRDC motion. Mr. Jackson thought it would be more respectful of him, since he has the flu, not to be here, and I fully agree.
We thank him a lot.
We thank him for a lot of things, especially that today. He wanted to make it very clear as to how emphatically they agree with the NRDC motion, and that how essential they think that motion and the granting of that motion is to preserving not only the actual integrity, but the appearance of integrity of this proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keeling. Any other officially designated parties? At this time, I will turn back to Director Nemeth and Mr. Mizell and Ms. Oftenberg if you wish to add anything.
Trip myself for DWR. As you might expect, the department has certain disagreements with the law and the facts that have been presented by the Protestants and other parties here this morning. We would request that we have the opportunity to at least respond in writing prior to you making any decision on this motion.
All right. Any other questions? If not, then I think we need to take a little break. We will return at 10:30. I thank everyone for their input this morning. I thank everyone who's been patient sitting there to present your policy statement. We will return at 10:30, and I promise we will get to those policy statements. Sit down, everyone. It is 10:30. We are resuming. How soon we forget, Mr. Elijam. Sit down. All right. Thank you all for your patience and for the comments and arguments presented today. Mr. Mizell, per your request, the department and the Bureau may have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to submit a written response to NRDC's motion, as well as all the comments and issues raised today. We advise that hearing team staff may follow up later today with questions that will be shared to the entire service list with specific issues we want the department and the Bureau to address in your response. All other parties, you will have until noon next Tuesday to respond to whatever is provided by the petitioners by close of day tomorrow. All the hearing days for next week, as well as tomorrow, are hereby vacated. Unless we inform you otherwise, be prepared to resume or to initiate or to begin the evidentiary portion on February 22nd. Does everyone have that? Is there any question on what I just said? All right. Thank you. With that, I will now go back to my prepared script for today. All right. How much of this background do you think we need? Since I see some new faces, let me take the time and I'll ask all the usual players to bear with us for a minute. But as you can probably tell already from this morning's discussion, this type of water right proceeding is very, very different from our usual public meetings. So let me share a little bit of background information on what this all means and what this all involves. A water right hearing is a quasi-judicial or a court-like proceeding, hence I get a gavel, conducted by us to develop a record of evidence relevant to specific key issues that we have identified in a hearing notice. We will rely on this evidentiary record to make our decision on this petition. While the hearing is open to the public to attend and to make policy-type statements, participation in the evidentiary part of the hearing is limited only to designated parties who submitted several months ago the required notices to participate. Those were the parties we heard from earlier today. Non-parties or interested persons who are not actively involved in the evidentiary portion of the hearing may provide comments in the form of a brief policy statement, either at the beginning of the hearing, in this case, beginning of part 2, or in writing prior to the close of the hearing record. So until such time in the future that we close the hearing record on this petition, you may continue to submit written policy statements. Unlike witnesses who testify on behalf of parties, interested persons who are providing policy statements are not required to take an oath and are not subject to cross-examination. And unlike witness testimony, policy statements are not considered evidence in support of the factual determinations in our decisions. But this important part of the hearing provides a valuable opportunity for us to hear from individuals and communities about general concerns and comments on the petition under consideration. So I really thank you for taking the time to come here and to provide your policy statements. And as I mentioned earlier, and as you've observed this morning, a water right hearing is very different from a general public meeting. Unlike our usual public meetings, a hearing is tightly structured. Parties are expected to adhere to specific requirements, And as hearing officers, Chair Marcus and I act much like judges to ensure that the hearing is conducted in an orderly fashion. We also take our responsibility to ensure the integrity of these proceedings extremely seriously. Unlike our workshops and meetings, board members and staff will be in a listening mode for most of the part. As unbiased arbiters of this matter, we will not interject during the hearing as we do in our usual meetings, and will hold most of our questions until after cross-examination is completed. This is common practice in water rights hearings and does not mean that we are not engaged in the process, let me assure you, far from it. We take this matter and our obligations very seriously and are committed to a fair and impartial proceeding. Our duty is to listen carefully and to consider everyone's points in the context of making a specific legal determination. Following this hearing, we will provide guidance to our hearing team in preparing the draft order to be considered by all the members of the State Water Resources Control Board at a public board meeting. The public will have the opportunity to comment in writing and orally on the draft order before we consider the adoption of that order. All right, let me now turn to the specific for this hearing. This hearing is being held in accordance with our October 30th, 2015 Notice of Petition and Notice of Public Hearing. As we have stated before, the hearing is narrowly focused on the proposed changes that are the subject of the water right change petition. The purpose of the change petition hearing is for us to obtain information on disputed facts to inform our decision whether to approve the change petition, approve subject to terms and conditions, or disapprove the petition. It is not a referendum on the WaterFix project. The existence or overall effects of the State Water Project and Central Valley Project generally, or the many other aspects and issues pertaining to the WaterFix proposal. It is focused solely on the changes that are being petitioned to us by petitioners. For us to approve that petition, the petitioners must establish, and we must find, that the proposed change will not injure any other legal user of the water involved or unreasonably affect fish and wildlife. In addition, a special provision contained in the Delta Reform Act of 2009 requires us to include appropriate delta flow criteria as a condition of any approval. And you've heard some of that already in the arguments earlier today. We will also consider whether the project is in the public interest. We conducted part one of the hearing earlier, which was focused on the potential effects of the changes requested on agricultural, municipal, industrial, and associated legal users of water. Part two of the hearing will focus on potential impacts on fish and wildlife and recreational uses of water, public interest, and conditions that should be placed on any approval of the petition to protect those uses. Part two will also include consideration of appropriate delta flow criteria for the WaterFix project. All right, now let me get specifically to policy statements. Policy statements provided today or in writing before the close of the record may address either part one or part two issues. As I stated earlier, a policy statement is a non-evidentiary statement and are limited to 3 minutes per person. Because we value each person's time and input, we will be strictly enforcing the 3-minute time limit so that we can hear from everyone today, and strongly discourage duplicative policy statement. If you presented a policy statement at the beginning of part one, you need not and should not present the same policy statement again in part two. In addition to non-parties who are making policy statements today, we are also allowing parties to provide policy statement. During part one of the hearing, we permitted parties to make policy statements in addition to opening statements in order to provide some flexibility for hearing party representatives who wish to make policy comments. However, to maintain an efficient hearing, we limited policy statements by party representatives to 3 minutes per speaker, and the time a party spent on policy statements was deducted from the 20 minutes afforded each party to present a policy statement. We will allow the same flexibility for parties in part two. We expect parties to make their policy statements today, with 2 exceptions. One is Colin Bailey for the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water requested, and will be allowed to present a policy statement at the beginning of the coalition's case in chief. And I believe yesterday we received a request, Mr. Keeling, from you to present your policy statement on behalf of, was it San Joaquin County? And your request is granted as well, Mr. Keeling. So consistent with part one, we ask parties to track your time on the honor system and deduct that time used to present policy statements from the 20 minutes allocated for their opening statements, or in the department's case, in presenting their case in chief. All right, policy statements will be heard in the following order. First, we will hear policy statements from any federal, state, and local elected officials or their representatives, followed by parties or interested persons who submitted a notice of intent to appear, followed by interested person who wished to make a policy statement but did not file a notice of intent to appear. Everyone here who wishes to provide an oral policy statement, including parties, is required to fill out a blue speaker card. They are available in the back. We will also accept written policy statement. There is a basket there to collect written policy statement in the front of the room. You may also submit written policy statements at a later date prior to the close of the hearing record. It is not necessary to read the written policy statement into the record. If you think you can't cover everything you want to say in 3 minutes, we encourage you to submit a written policy statement. We do read all of them. All right. Are there any other housekeeping procedural matter we need to discuss before we get to the policy statement? A reminder, Mr. Mizell and Director Nemeth, the deadline for 5 p.m. tomorrow also include a submission of the policy statement that you read into the record today. And I've been reminded that we will also hear from appointed officials after elected officials, for Director Bonham, who's sitting in the audience. Right, with that, all right, with that, I will start calling names of people who have submitted speaker cards. And again, I thank you for your patience today. We will first hear from, and I apologize in advance because I will be mispronouncing a lot of names. I do not quite have the chair's talent in this. All right, Director Bonham, please come up.
Good morning, Chair, board members, staff. My name is Chuck Bonham. I'm the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. which even on a morning like this morning, I still think is a fantastic job. My comments represent the department's policy statement on Part 2, which, as I understand it, is your focus on the potential effects of this petition on fish and wildlife, as well as those conditions you may wish to place on any approval, including appropriate flow criteria for the California WaterFix project. Here's my bottom line. In fall of 2016, our department received an application from the Department of Water Resources under the California Endangered Species Act for an incidental take permit. We took a long, hard look at what we received, and in July of 2017, we issued an incidental take permit under the Controlling State Endangered Species Act law. We can only issue that permit if we conclude that the project's impacts are minimized and fully mitigated. That is a standard more rigorous than I would argue you find in the parallel Federal Endangered Species Act, and more protective than the standard of unreasonable effects to fish and wildlife. In that permit, you will find fish measures, terrestrial measures, rigorous adaptive management, funding assurances, but you will also find performance metrics. Performance metrics matter because, as I observed this morning, trust is a fundamental feature at play between all these parties. I encourage you to look at page 168 of our permit, which is evidence in your record, and I recommend you consider adopting certain conditions of approval from our permit into any order you may issue to ensure you're minimizing and fully mitigating, which goes beyond protecting against unreasonable effects. We include 3 biological criteria, which are performance standards in this permit. The first requires the project, once built, to operate the North Delta diversion to achieve juvenile salmon survival rates through the intake ridge at 95% or more against a pre-construction rate. The second biological criteria says that the project shall operate to achieve pre-project juvenile salmon survival rates at Chips Island. And the third biological criteria says the project shall ensure the project does not result in overall decrease in the population size of Delta smelt and longfin smelt from pre-project conditions. Those are mandatory performance criteria. In addition, we adopted protective flow standards from the existing federal biological opinions, and we did more. For the first time under state law, we're requiring specific flow releases for longfin smelt in the spring months of the year.
Thank you, Director. NOAA Fisheries. I did not want to mangle your last name.
That's okay. Marcinkiewicz, thank you. I've heard all various permutations, so no offense taken. Good morning. My name is Kathy Marcinkiewicz. I'm here today as a proxy for Maria Ray, my Assistant Regional Administrator, representing the West Coast region of NOAA Fisheries. And we wish to add our support for the process that you are undertaking under your unique authorities. As you know, California WaterFix, the project itself, has been through numerous iterations. Our role has been to provide the technical assistance to reclamation and DWR along the way, and ultimately to complete our ESA Section 7 consultation and biological opinion. NIMS issued a biological opinion that reached conclusions of no jeopardy and no adverse modification of critical habitat for all species in our jurisdiction on June 16, 2017. I want to emphasize the challenges of working through the scientific information that will be presented to you on the fish impacts of construction and operation of the project. As we all know, the Delta is a complex and dynamic ecosystem, and honing in on what is known and where the uncertainties lie is key to understanding both the impacts and the benefits of this very large infrastructure project. No doubt you will hear competing interpretation of that science, and I want to apologize that our experts are not part of your process due to limitations in our capacity and our ongoing federal legal process. Our biological opinion has been submitted into your record for this proceeding, and it speaks for itself. I encourage you to read it to see how we work through the anticipated effects of the project using the best available scientific and commercial data, which is our legal standard. Some of the adverse effects that we carefully evaluated include new projected impacts of in-water construction and barge traffic, the operation of North Delta diversions and flow survival effects on juvenile salmonids, including necessary bypass flows and operations to minimize those effects, the potential benefits of dual conveyance in the South Delta, necessary habitat mitigation, and perhaps most important, the reliance on a robust and well-funded adaptive management program. We are confident that the adaptive management program, if well-funded as required in our terms and conditions, will allow the agencies to make iterative adjustments to operational management over time as our understanding of the species and of the Delta ecosystem continues to evolve. Also of key importance to us at the time that we were writing the biological opinion, the State Resources Agency made a new commitment through the Salmon Resiliency Strategy to improve the viability of winter run and spring run Chinook salmon. These and other key habitat improvements are expected to improve the baseline condition of the species, supporting the non-jeopardy conclusions in our opinion. So in conclusion, NOAA Fisheries embraces a substantial collaboration that has led us to this point, and we fully support the state's recognition that providing a more reliable supply for California is co-equal to the goal of protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Delta ecosystem. We wish you well in completing your review. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pergladovich from Yolo County. My apologies, and you were an elected official. We should have called on you first.
Well, I'm representing an elected official, so I think this is appropriate. Phil Pogledich, once again, for Yolo County Council. I'm going to be reading a policy statement from Supervisor Oscar Villegas, who apologizes for not being able to attend today.
Actually, we have his written policy statement.
You should have copies of it, and I did serve it by email yesterday. I would
There
like
is no need to read the entirety if you could perhaps capture the key points.
I'll capture a few key points, as you suggest. So I'll start by pointing to the second paragraph in which the supervisor recognizes the difficulty of the task before you, and that in presiding over these hearings, you're at the very center of the economic, environmental, and political controversies that define modern water policy in California. And then skipping down, as he says, Clarksburg and other Delta legacy communities are like nothing else in the state. Many of my constituents have been farming the same land and been part of the same community for up to 6 generations. They are leaders in the Delta agricultural industry. They operate award-winning wineries and supply wine grapes to many others. They farm row crops and cultivate orchards, serve their communities, and occupy an increasingly rare place in California agriculture that deserves respect and protection. I'll skip down a little further again. I need not tell you how hollow it will be to simply say, I'm sorry, to 4th, 5th, or 6th generation farmers across the Delta if the WaterFix proceeds and their concerns are realized. If you hold DWR to its task, you will not be in that position. For DWR will have persuaded you that the WaterFix, despite all the uncertainties about how it will be funded, how it will be built, and even what it will ultimately be, will not cause the serious harms to the Delta ecosystem, economy, or communities that so many fear. And then he closes by thanking you for your work in this proceeding. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Holman, representing the city of Stockton. The Vice Mayor of Stockton. Again, my apologies. Should have called on you first.
No problem, Madam Chair. I just thank you for this opportunity to address you. I have not made myself, I haven't figured out how to clone myself yet, nor for good reason, I'm not omnipresent. But I have issues back in Stockton that I have to get to, so I thank you for getting me to the podium in a fast way. Thank you. I represent the city of Stockton. My name is Elbert Holman. I'm the Vice Mayor of the city of Stockton, and I'm also the Vice Chair of the city's Water Committee. And I'm here today on behalf of the city's 300,000 plus residents, and we would like to voice our strong concern that the WaterFix project is not in the public interest because we feel that it threatens the future prosperity and the health of the city of Stockton, which you well know is the largest city in the Delta. So the well-being of our city, its residents, its economy is inextricably linked to the Delta. The quality and the quantity of water Delta supplies in the DECO ecosystem also. And it is clear from the evidence that we have that has been also presented to you and what you will see in part 2 of this hearing, where the WaterFix project will degrade the environment of the Delta. And in doing so, we believe that it will compromise our city's water supply and other essential services. So we have participated in the WaterFix process from the beginning for more than 10 years now. We submitted comments on the environmental review documents 4 times throughout the process. And we have made it clear that our concerns about the impact that this project will have on our community. And it is clear to us that not a single voice of our 300+ thousand residents has been heard by the project's proponents. Stockton has repeatedly asked DWR and Reclamation to include an analysis of the water quality and flow effects of our drinking water intake and wastewater discharge locations. The project proponents have confirmed what Stockton has feared from the very beginning, and that is that Stockton's concerns for water quality, for a secure drinking water source, for a healthy environment and healthy economy, we believe are meaningless to them. Despite the evidence of the harm this project will cause to the city, our city, the Department of Water Resources has refused to recognize or mitigate the impacts to the city at the same time that it has entered into agreements in favor of other Delta parties to guarantee them clean water. This desperate treatment by the state agency that is supposed to serve all citizens of our state is unconscionable. DWR has treated Stockton's 300,000+ residents, we feel, as second-class citizens and shifted the burden of mitigating the WaterFix impacts to the city and other non-project participants. I just want to leave you with this. If the WaterFix project goes forward and the environmental impacts we have demonstrated become a reality, we believe that it will be Stockton citizens that have to pay the cost of the impacts, its water supply and wastewater treatment and environmental remediation. So we're asking the State Board, when considering whether to grant or deny this change petition and whether this project is in the public interest, we just want you to remember that Stockton has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in its drinking water, its wastewater treatment process in order to comply with strict standards advocated by the project proponents, and that placing the project's financial and environmental burdens on Stockton is patently unfair and unjust. The WaterFix project is not in the public interest, and we believe that this change petition should be denied. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. And that are all the cards I have for elected and appointed officials. All right. All right. Now let's get to the others. Steve Jones, followed by Philip Williams, representing Westlands.
Morning. I'm Steve Jones with the Center for Biological Diversity. We are a party to the CEQA and CISA lawsuits challenging WaterFix, but not a party to this hearing. We have been deeply concerned that the Twin Tunnels project would cause planetary-level, irreversible harm to the Bay Delta ecosystem, harming longfin smelt, Delta smelt, endangered salmon, among others, and not just fish. The extensive transmission lines required for the WaterFix project threatens fully protected sandhill cranes as well. This announcement of the change, we're obviously still sorting through it, and it's unclear whether this is meant to be a phase thing or whether this is a single tunnel. But we have real concerns over either approach. The single tunnel project isn't just smaller or a phased version. It may actually have more severe impacts. For example, by concentrating the adverse effects of diversions. On the other hand, a staging of the project doesn't lessen the effects of the WaterFix project. It would actually make them worse. For example, by stretching out the temporary impacts of construction over many years. The public hasn't seen the new modeling that DWR will use to justify its claim that it's just the same project. We can't even test these claims, and although we're not a party here, many of us are partners many of our partners in the CEQA and CISA lawsuits are parties. They have to develop their cases in chief based on a different project from the one DWR is now proposing. It makes little sense to proceed with this hearing based on this outdated, possibly irrelevant information. So we would oppose the change order. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Water Agency.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officers, Ms. Diadamo. My name is Philip Williams. I serve as the General Counsel at Westlands Water District. Mr. Birmingham would like to have some comments read, but he could not be here today, so I'll be reading those in, although I have redacted them down to 4 sentences. Westlands Water District understands that the Department of Water Resources is now proposing a staged implementation of the Cal WaterFix. However, it is not known how, if at all, a staged project would affect Central Valley Project water supplies. Westlands looks forward to learning more about the impacts of this staged project through this hearing process. It is Westlands' hope that at the end of this hearing, it can express unqualified support for the project because the district can have confidence that the staged project, and more particularly the conditions imposed by an order approving DWR's change petition, will not further reduce Central Valley Project water supplies. Thank you for consideration, Mr. Birmingham.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Terry, followed by Mr. Eichenberg, representing San Francisco Baykeeper.
Melinda Terry, North Delta Water Agency. Before I start my time, I just want to say that I wrote this statement prior to yesterday's announcement, so I probably would have written and delivered a different one, but I'm going to go ahead and deliver what I had prepared. So I just...
No, just tell us what you really wanted to say.
Well, I kind of want to deliver part of that, but I would have done a longer written statement probably if I knew about the other. So with that, I'll go ahead and start. During part one of this hearing, petitioners claim that the history of the Department of Water Resources compliance with our 1981 contract is to be construed as evidence that DWR will continue to comply with the contract under the operation of the proposed WaterFix project. However, part one testimony of North Delta Water Agency experts pointed out that petitioners' own modeling presented during part one shows that operation of the project would result in an additional 20 exceedances of the contract's water quality criteria. Now, during part two, the petitioners offer new modeling that removes South Delta export restrictions in October and November, resulting in significant increases in salinity at Edmonton during those months. Instead of fully disclosing the new modeling results, the petitioners hide the results behind shaded out bar charts that focus only on the April through August time period. What petitioners do not reveal is that the new modeling shows salinity increases by 7% in October and 9% in November at the North Delta contract compliance point at 3 Mile Slough. These significant increases are compared to 17% and 19% reductions in salinity during these months under the old modeling. The agency's experts estimate that these significant increases in salinity result in over 200 additional violations of the contract's year-round water quality criteria. To present such new and crucial evidence during a phase of the hearing concerning environmental effects and public interest issues defies logic, fairness, and due process. Petitioners' bait and switch is compounded by the fact that the protestants are precluded from asking most of the part one witnesses whether the new modeling changes any of their opinions because they're not offered at witnesses during part two. For example, DWR's lead water quality and water level modeling witness, Dr. Parviz Nader Tarani, has only submitted a sworn written declaration for part two and is not on any of the witness panels for cross-examination. DWR's lead witness, Maureen Sargent, who during part one offered unsubstantiating conclusions in her testimony on the effects of the project in the North Delta contract, has no apparent role in part two. How will water users in the North Delta or the board members know whether the changes to the project, the new modeling, alter any of her part one testimony or her opinions after that? Petitioners lack transparency, and the ever-evolving project description for the California Water Project has resulted in stakeholders spending millions of hours navigating their way through thousands of pages and multiple modeling versions, and more as of yesterday, apparently. And for what? After more than 10 years since inception of this project, there is still no defined enforceable operations plan offered in the petition, and the petitioners refuse to acknowledge or disclose the full extent and nature of the impacts of the project. In the remaining phases of the hearing, the board must demand specificity from petitioners and not settle for the vague, generalized, and unquantified testimony that petitioners have submitted so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. Mr. Eichenberg, followed by, do you wish to speak again, Ms. Berrigan Pereira? Okay. Then after Mr. Eichenberg will be Dorothy Luce, representing Friends of the San Francisco Estuary.
Hello, Ms. Dodek, Ms. Marcus, and Ms. Diadamo. Thank you. Good to see you guys again. My name is Ben Eichenberg. I'm here on behalf of San Francisco Baykeeper. Baykeeper are more than 5,000 members and supporters believe in a healthy San Francisco Bay. For more than 25 years, Baykeeper has been the premier watchdog of water quality for San Francisco Bay. Today, California WaterFix is one of the greatest threats to the health of the Bay, its wildlife, and the communities that rely on a thriving Bay ecosystem. Baykeeper has submitted multiple comments on the likely water quality and ecological impacts of WaterFix. The main problem areas include the trade of high-quality Sacramento River water in the Delta for lower-quality San Joaquin River water, increasing harmful concentrations of selenium, pesticides, nutrients, and other contaminants. This places in jeopardy the communities and the species that rely on Delta water. Harmful algal blooms in the Delta, such as microcystin, are already increasing in strength and frequency. A more northerly extraction point will further increase the duration and severity of these blooms. WaterFix would accelerate salinity intrusions into the Delta, further reducing brackish habitat, increasing habitat for invasive species, and threatening water supplies. Reduced freshwater flows would inhibit the ability of migrating salmon to quickly navigate through the Delta and Bay to the ocean, increasing the likelihood of predation and reducing already struggling salmon populations. WaterFix will worsen existing selenium problems. This threatens federally listed green sturgeon and diving ducks, since selenium concentrations in Suisun Bay are directly associated with freshwater flow. WaterFix will reduce the sediment transport to San Francisco Bay as well, threatening existing wetlands and beaches, as well as reducing the ability of wetlands to keep up with sea level rise and protect the Bay Area from future flooding. The Bay Delta ecosystem is already in crisis, as I think has been adequately discussed, and the board is well aware. WaterFix will make matters worse. Salmon survival through the Delta will be worse, according to the National Marine Fisheries Service and other reputable scientists. Longfin smelt abundance will be worse, according to the state of California's own scientists. These fish, Delta smelt and many others, will be harmed by WaterFix impacts. And these impacts include reduced water quality, reduced turbidity, increased salinity, and reduced Delta outflow. Finally, the permit application submitted by WaterFix would allow the continued operation of South Delta pumps in most months, eliminating any supposed environmental benefits from a more northerly diversion point. These known impacts are bad enough, but as been covered, the project has not been adequately studied, and most impacts are only projected in the near term. For instance, some of the project's modeling only looks at impacts through 2025, prior to the expected completion of WaterFix. Long-term impacts, such as those that might result from climate change and sea level rise, are ignored. WaterFix isn't even in its final form. We don't know what the final project will look like, neither does the Department of Water Resources, and neither does the board. Respectfully, this board cannot in good conscience find that this project does not unreasonably affect fish and wildlife or recreational uses of water or other public trust resources without an adequate project description that accurately describes the project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Eichenberg. Ms. Luce, followed by Mr. Craig Johns.
Good morning. My name is Darcy Luce. I'm with Friends of the San Francisco Estuary. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today. This hearing and updates to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan represent a pivotal moment in California water and ecosystem management. This project, as currently proposed, will improve some hydrologic functions and increase water supply reliability, but will lower water quality in the Delta and is anticipated to have negative impacts to listed species and to the estuary's food web. These negative impacts, and more importantly, the absence of benefit, are not justifiable under the public trust doctrine when the Delta is already in ecological crisis. In this case, protection of the public trust should take into account the imbalance in beneficial uses up to this point that has created this crisis. It is not sufficient justification for this project to meet outdated regulatory standards and contractual obligations that reflect a wetter past. Lowered water quality also violates federal and state anti-degradation policies. The State Water Board's anti-degradation policy highlights the importance of weighing the socioeconomic benefits of the project against its impacts, and the final EIR-EIS and reinforces the necessity of including a socioeconomic evaluation in the State Board's decision regarding this water rights petition. Economic analyses have been conducted on impacts to jobs and income derived from project implementation, and to a limited extent, on non-use value of the delta. To a limited extent on impacts to other types of use values. However, an analysis that estimates the non-use value of the delta as a unique cultural and biological resource is absent. Our recent review of existing economic literature on the Delta, the San Francisco Bay Delta estuary, and the watershed's in-stream flows concluded that non-use values have not been estimated for the estuary and its major tributaries, and recommended a contingent valuation study to determine the unique value of the Delta to the state and nation. Furthermore, urban and agricultural valuations of water use failed to account for the opportunity costs of beneficial uses lost when water is extracted from the ecosystem. A complete economic analysis would also need to establish existence values for threatened and listed fish species and other aquatic species that could decline further under the proposed project, along with the existence value of impacted wildlife refuges and migratory corridors. Finally, any analysis must consider the link between possible unintended socioeconomic impacts and concomitant ecological consequences of the proposed project. For example, quote, temporary impacts to Delta agriculture could very well degrade the long-term stability of the Delta's agricultural community and lead to increased suburban and exurban sprawl in the area. We urge you to conduct an adequate socioeconomic analysis before proceeding with your decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Johns, followed by Mr. Keeling. Did you wish to speak again?
No, you've already addressed the placeholder issue I had.
Thank you, Mr. Keeling. Mr. Johns will be followed by Mr. Claypool.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer and members of the board and staff. My name is Craig Johns. I'm here today for the Partnership for Sound Science and Environmental Policy. I want to thank you for the opportunity to present these comments today, as well as submit my written policy statement on behalf of PSEP back in December. And I'd also like to thank DWR for highlighting the concerns that we raised in our policy statement about the fact that their proposal, as highlighted in the EIR that's submitted support the project, does not adequately address the issue and the need for adequate monitoring of selenium that will likely be coming from the project once it's constructed and built. I will not repeat any of the issues that I raised in our written statement of December 6th. I would like to simply point out in response to a couple of comments that Ms. Namath made earlier in her presentation, and frankly, I'm confused about what project they're going to be moving forward with or not forward with. I appreciate the hearing officer's question confirming what their intentions are. We're going to take them at their word that they're going to move forward with the big project as they've proposed in the change petition, and highlight the fact that their own EIR-EIS has suggested that there will be at least 11% more selenium coming out of the Delta as a result of the operations of the WaterFix project if it is built as proposed. And that roughly 450 additional kilograms of selenium is going to have a big deal to San Francisco Bay as well as to the Delta. And because the EIR-EIS found that they were not significant impacts, there was no specific mitigation requirements or even monitoring requirements that were required to be set up to monitor whether their own projections are accurate. And that is the substance of the second comment that I'd like to make in respect to Ms. Namath's comments this morning. And I was pleased to hear her say that DWR commits to, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I didn't get it written down quickly enough, and I'll wait to see what the written statement was, but they commit to putting in place necessary monitoring for the project. Even though DWR objected to our policy statement because they didn't like the fact that we were submitting a proposed monitoring plan for selenium in the Delta, we are happy to hear Ms. Namath say that they're committed to putting in place proper monitoring for their project. And I don't know if she's read our policy statement, but I'll make sure that I get it over to her this afternoon. And hopefully they will look at it more favorably the second time around and include those recommendations that we've submitted. With that, I thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Mr. Claypool, followed by Bob Wright.
Good morning, Chair Dodek, board members, and hardworking staff. I'm Dale Claypool, board member of the Friends of Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. Friends of Stone Lakes is a volunteer, nonprofit, non-governmental group that supports the refuge and is entirely separate from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The Stone Lakes Refuge is one of a dwindling number of areas along the Pacific Flyway that continue to have viable lakes, wetlands, and streams. As such, it provides critical habitat for waterfowl and other migratory birds of international concern, as well as a number of endangered plant and animal species. It also serves as a buffer against the effects of urban encroachment into the Delta from Elk Grove, South Sacramento, and surrounding areas. Even before the tunnels project, Stone Lakes was identified as one of the 6 most threatened refuges in the entire U.S. Fish and Wildlife system. Now it's ground zero for the impacts of the Delta tunnels. The water intakes, tunnel shafts, intermediate forebay, and the transmission lines serving them would all be within or close by the refuge. It's difficult for small organizations like ours to participate in a process of this magnitude and duration, but due to our serious concerns, we spent almost a decade working to try to minimize the impact of the tunnels on the refuge. We support the strengthening of certain mitigation measures that have occurred over the course of the process, such as creating wetlands and providing temporary storage areas, forage areas. But we remain concerned about whether they're enforceable and whether there's adequate funds to support them. Furthermore, many issues have yet to be adequately addressed. Construction activities and related traffic would surround and bisect the refuge, making it unsuitable for wildlife and public. New and modified above-ground power lines near and in the refuge would result in increased bird strikes and increased mortality to greater sandhill cranes and other birds. I was going to comment on DWR's recent change, but Ms. Meserve already did that for us and was much more eloquent than I would be, and I just say that we associate strongly with her comments. In closing, we are concerned that with cost-cutting and project redefinition, the promised environmental commitments and mitigation will go by the wayside. Even if all the mitigation was implemented, we're very concerned about the damage the tunnels project would do to the Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge and the species that depend on it for habitat. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Claypool. Mr. Wright, followed by North Delta Cares. North Delta Cares. Help. Matney? Okay, Ms. Daly, you know best. All right, Mr. Wright.
Good morning again, Bob Wright, representing Friends of the River and Sierra Club, California. In terms of policy, you've heard from before this hearing even started a couple of years ago from various groups telling you that, hey, you should update your Bay Delta quality water plan first before even considering this petition. And of course, the focus of those comments were on the environmental issues, that you really want to know how much water we need to keep flowing through the Delta before deciding whether a massive project upstream could be developed, reducing the freshwater flows through the Delta. But I think it's turned out that the need to update your Bay Delta water quality plan, and you've said in the past that the standards will be more stringent to protect the Delta, is as important to economic interests as it is to the environmental impacts. We've seen all this uncertainty. We've seen various groups pull out from stepping up to participate in financing, paying for the WaterFix tunnels. And it really would make a tremendous amount of sense as a matter of policy, particularly if you take the opportunity now to continue the hearing until after you get the supplemental final environmental impact report that DWR announced yesterday afternoon they're going to do to move forward, update the Bay Delta plan with the more stringent standards you need, dealing with the issues raised under the Delta Reform Act, because that would not only be good for the environment, that would allow the districts to the south that are trying to decide whether they want to participate in a project, and if so, what the size should be able to determine, does it make any sense for them from a benefit cost analysis. I do think that would be a very important policy for you to consider, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. North Delta Cares, Ms. Daly, followed by Moore. Ms. Daly, why don't you just bring your two speakers up? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Daly, and I did receive permission to speak for the people in North Delta Cares. I have several policy statements with me, and others will be sent later, but I'll only ask permission to read two of them to you today, if that's all right with you. The first one is from...
They are short?
The first one is pretty short. The second one is a little longer.
All right.
Thank you. The first one is from Melvin Skip Seebeck. He is a well driller in the North Delta. And he says, my son Mike and I have extensive well drilling experience in the North Delta, and we are very educated about water quality issues. Construction of the California WaterFix project will involve hundreds of dewatering wells, which will damage individual wells and overall groundwater quality. Some of these impacts are known and spelled out in the final EIR, but many impacts are unknown. These impacts will negatively affect current and future uses of our Delta groundwater, which is a public trust resource. To help mitigate this damage to our wells and groundwater, I request that your board require, as a condition of any diversion permits, that the California Groundwater Association, in conjunction with all affected landowners, have a direct voice in all aspects and impacts of the dewatering projects. This must include 4 points. 1, the entire dewatering plan, including but not limited to drilling methods, materials to be used, locations, depths, diameters, and abandonment procedures. 2, present and future adverse impacts on existing wells. 3, present and future adverse impacts on aquifers. And 4, mitigation of present and future adverse impacts on wells and aquifers. And a copy of this is going to the California Groundwater Association and to the Clarksburg Community Association. That is from Skip. He has an office on Clarksburg Road in Clarksburg. And this is from Von Matney. They are business owners in Hood, where one of the intakes is requested to be put according to the last plan. And she says, I, Von Matney, represent Hood Supply Company and Restaurant and the Matney family. I was born and raised in Sacramento 56 years ago. I've been boating with my parents and grandparents on Folsom Lake and the Sacramento River ever since I can remember. I remember fishing and climbing on rocks with my father when I was very young. I learned to swim in our neighborhood pool and was later swimming across the Sacramento American River as a teen. I have also water skied at Folsom Lake, Oroville Lakes, Elmonor Lake since I was 12 years old. In grammar school, I learned about zoology and the life cycles of the salmon. I have visited Nimitz Fish Hatchery as a child and again with my own children. I canoed down the Eel River for a week the summer before starting high school. A fond memory of emotional growth, survival skills, and exploration. My parents acquired a river resort trailer in my late teens situated on the Sacramento River between Walnut Grove and Isleton. It was called Coquette Resort. It's still there. I was there when I spent my summers as a teen and young adult. It was there that I discovered the smoothest water ski water in all of Northern California. It was there where we traveled by boat on the river to sloughs and parked and got out to have lunch, where we enjoyed the quiet life of waking up to hungry ducks on our dock in the morning and the beautiful sunsets at evening, where we explored Old Town Lock and went to the big store to buy our groceries in Walnut Grove, still there. Where we jet skied into the meadows to meet up with our boating buddies, where we slept out on the boat because it was fun. I remember skiing before breakfast as often as possible and sharing meals with neighbors like one big happy family. Yes, these were some of the best days of my life on the Sacramento River in the heart of the Delta. Lucky me. Many years have passed since that time, but the Delta is still the same. Luckily, I currently live right next to the Sacramento River at I-5 and Pocket Road. I can still enjoy the beautiful view of the river from my balcony. I still enjoy the calling of ducks and geese as they fly overhead in V-shaped formations following the path of the Sacramento River. I'm thankful for the preservation of the nearby wetlands and wildlife sanctuaries in the area. I have recently enjoyed viewing photos that friends have taken of waterfowl and eagle's nests near my home. My husband once caught a salmon with a neighbor on the Sacramento River near Freeport. My family has enjoyed our boat and jet skis on the Sacramento River just as I did with my family back then. My husband and I have enjoyed the safe, leisurely motorcycle ride down State Highway 160, also known as River Road, with our friends for many years. 15 years ago, we bought a restaurant property that had been closed down in Hood. We restored and remodeled extensively, spending a large amount of time and money. Hood Supply Company American Bar and Grill reopened in December of 2015. This historic landmark, which was originally part of the little town of Richland, now called Hood, dates back to 1860. It is now considered one of the finest eating establishments in the Delta. We are smack dab in the middle of the construction zone of the tunnels. Not to mention, we are on the corner of a major thoroughfare, I-5 and Hood Franklin Road, and State Highway 160. The impact of this construction, noise, detours, trucking, traffic, dust, dirt, etc., will certainly have an impact on our new business. Continued success. It will probably kill it. No one knows for sure. I can't imagine anyone choosing to dine in the middle of a construction site or even near one. If Hood Supply Company does not continue to gain popularity as a sought-after eating establishment due to the interruption of this construction project, my family and this new business will be doomed financially and emotionally. For those of us who have many fond memories of the Sacramento Delta, and for those of us who have memories to be made, I strongly urge you to look at what you would be taking away, and not so much as what you would be gaining. This project could negatively affect so many lives in so many ways, not to mention the landscape, the history, the farming, the wells, the fish, the birds, the wildlife, the recreation. The love of the Delta, also known as Little Netherlands, should be preserved. Last sentence, with a thank you for the opportunity to speak and share my letter of comment and policy statement impacts from the California WaterFix. Sincerely, Von Matney.
Oh, wow, well, thank her. Her words were painted a really, really vivid imagery for me.
I will tell her thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, field trip. What was the name of that restaurant again?
Supply Bar and Grill.
Thank you.
5 and Hood Franklin Road.
Ms. Swenson, also from North Delta Cares. Anna Swenson? Oh, okay. Sorry for that. Ms. Seward, followed by Penny Opal Plant.
Nikki Seward for Snow Harbor Resorts, LLC.
And you did get, Ms. Seward, there was 3 minutes, not 5?
Yes, I got that. So I shortened it. First of all, I want to say thank you for doing the work you do, because I understand protecting the water quality for everybody in California is a huge job. I mean, it is an unbelievable job. It's such a big state. But I do want to also say that since 2000 or maybe 2004, as we've been all going through this process, the water quality for humans in the Delta, everybody keeps talking about fish and other issues. The water quality for humans is degrading, and I'm pretty sure that you all are aware of it just because of all the tests that are coming out. And it is degrading for our surface water and our drinking water aquifer. Too much water is being diverted from the Sacramento River watershed. It is affecting the Delta right now, and as we go on with more hearings and more talk, it's just going to get worse and worse, and it takes time for the aquifer to recharge. So my request is actually to reduce exports outside of the Sacramento River watershed until the water quality improves, because there's a big drastic change going on in the Delta. I also request, there's such a confusion about which project it is. I believe that we still don't know exactly how much is being diverted from the Delta. we hear about the exports, but exports and diversions are two different things. And now there's new modeling to look at. So as a policy for all of us, for you, for us, almost everybody involved, we need time to review what it is the new proposal, because the changes in sizes of tunnels affect recreation. It affects it because that means bigger barges coming through that create bigger wakes that impact recreation. So it's not just about water. We are also supposed to be in phase 2 of impacts to recreation, which I know we'll be getting to. The other one point I wanted to make is Department of Water Resources is supposed to protect all of our water rights. All I've seen here is attorneys protecting water rights of people that work with the state water contractors. And I'm requesting that maybe this board has the power to set up a totally different set of attorneys or a fund that the people that are, the agencies that are all trying to protect Northern California watershed, Northern California Delta, that there be a fund to help pay for this, because this is huge. We've spent years now in hearings at our own expense, and there's so many attorneys involved trying to protect, and there is no fund. State, paid by our taxpayer dollars that protect us. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Seward. Ms. Plant, followed by Norm Sands.
Morning, relatives. My name is Penny Opal Plant. I'm Yaqui, a Mexican, Choctaw, and Cherokee. My family has lived in San Pablo and Richmond since the 1930s. I first want to pay my respects to the indigenous people of this land, whose ancestors lived for thousands of years within the natural laws of this area. I oftentimes think of the writings from the first Spaniards that came here, of how the sky was black with migrating birds, and the plethora of wildlife, our non-human relatives that were here. I am a signatory on the Indigenous Women of the Americas Defending Mother Earth Treaty. I am not here on behalf of the treaty, but I am here on behalf of my obligation to the treaty and to my grandson. Water is life. We can't live without water, and neither can our non-human relatives that live in the Delta. This, to me, as a woman, is a water theft that diminishes the sacred system of life that the Delta has inside of her, around her, and above her. This cannot pass, this WaterFix. We've seen over the years how climate has changed our ability to have fresh and clean water, how industry has changed our ability for fresh and clean water. And from my heart to yours, especially to the women who carry more water than men and who have a greater responsibility to the water, because ourselves and our daughters and our nieces, when they are pregnant, their babies swim in a sea of water and are born on a great wave. My responsibility is to the water, and I understand that that's your responsibility too. So please, please protect this water and the life that lives inside of her belly. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sands.
Hi, Chairman DeVock and board members. My name is Norm Sands. I also come here and stand with Penny Opal Platt. I felt compelled to come here today to stand for all our non-human relatives. We don't need science or your experts to tell us that our non-human relatives, our standstill relatives, our flyers, they will die with whatever you do. We don't believe there's an acceptable amount that can die. I ask that you take into consideration all life. All life is sacred. I hope.
Thank you, Mr. Sands. That is all the speaker's card I have for policy statement. Is anyone else who wishes to provide a policy statement today? All right. Oh, please come up. And if afterwards you could fill out one of these cards just so we can officially have you.
Yes, I will do that. Thank you very much. My name is Ken Payne. I'm with the Northern California Water Storage Forum. And our concern is about the overall flow on the Sacramento River. With any sort of diversion, there really needs to be more upstream storage in order to provide the Delta with the sort of water it needs for pulse flows, for the X-tube mixing zone, and other environmental enhancements of the Delta. With sea level rise and climate change, the only solution to protecting the Delta really is more storage upstream. That would include Sites Reservoir. It would include Temperance Flat on the, further south, and other storage projects upstream. So our concern is that unless there's more water storage upstream, permanent water storage upstream, there's not going to be enough flow to protect the Delta and in particular the lower Sacramento River. The Auburn Dam was started in 1970, started and stopped in 1975, and would have provided flood protection to Sacramento as well as controlled flows of temperature and to the lower Sacramento River, and as well as the closest source for pulse flows to the Delta. So without upstream storage, there's really no way to protect the Delta at all, particularly with sea level rise. You'll need more and more storage upstream all the time unless you're going to completely inundate the Delta. So thank you for considering other options, and thank you for having the hearing.
Thank you. Anyone else? Not seeing any taker. Let me again recap my instructions from earlier. Petitioners, you have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to provide a written response to NRDC's motion, the joinders, as well as the statements you heard today. All other parties will have until noon on Tuesday to respond to petitioners' submittal. Let me also add, Mr. Mizell, that your submittal should also include Director Nemeth's written statement today. The hearing days of tomorrow and all of next week are canceled, and until we rule on the motion or inform you otherwise, parties should assume that the evidentiary portion will begin on February 22nd. Are there any questions? Mr. Mizell.
Mizell for DWR. You mentioned earlier that staff may have certain questions they would like explicitly mentioned excuse me, in our response. Is there a time?
If so, we will provide that on the service list by close of business today.
Thank you very much.
By 5 p.m. today. All right, thank you all. With that, we're adjourned.